to is something we call bundling, and so we do that in any of our projects. So in order to not disturb a school, we kind of budget in 5-year increments, correct? So if we have a major project at a site like a Venice Middle School, yeah. So if we have a major project at a site like a Venice Middle School and it's an HVAC project we currently have undergoing, we will look at other things around that campus we need to do at the same time. And so no, that would be considered part of the sub project if it was under $2 million. But on a project like that, that's going to come before the board because it was a major project.
Well, once if the project was obviously it's Venice Middle, so I support it. Yeah. But if it was $250,000, it wasn't a sub project, but let's say renovating that outside area was $250,000.
Let's talk about it from the perspective of it's not part of an ongoing project.
It's not.
We want to put in a covered walkway somewhere. We get a lot of requests from schools for covered walkways. Right. In the budget, there is a wedge called small projects. And we kind of spend that. So every year, Jody's staff will go out and ask the principals, what are the things that you'd like us to do at your school? We collect all their input. We meet with a group to include the executive directors, and we talk about how do we prioritize those. Somebody says, I want 100 linear feet of covered walkway, and that's going to cost $300,000. Under this policy, the way it's drafted, we would spend the money that you allocate for small projects, and we would not come back to you to enter into that contract. It's under $325,000.
Would that small project be in the CIP plan? Would there be a thing in the CIP plan? Because the issue, the main issue is there was something early in the year where we have to share our capital dollars with charter schools. And so we were looking at the CIP plan and people are like, well, what do you want to cut out of the CIP plan? But yet there were a whole bunch of capital projects that were not involved in that plan that should be part of that discussion of what do you want to cut. So my question is that small project budget, is that part of the CIP plan? So that when we're making those decisions about what to push forward, what to push out, what to cut, what not to cut, is that part of that discussion?
So that's one of the tasks and kind of the line that I've asked them to draw that is not clear today is what is in the capital improvement plan and what is not. And so if this policy is adopted as presented, that line becomes $325,000. You would not see in the capital improvement plan any item less than $325,000. So you would have the ability through that plan to vet projects of $325,000 and above, and you would have the ability to allocate funds to small projects. And so if you were looking for money in the capital budget, you could vet individual projects, or you could say, I want to decrease the allocation from small projects downward or upward. And so that would be the line. Currently, that line doesn't exist.
But the line for small projects would be like $10 million. It would be some number, a multiple of $325,000.
Any project over $325,000 would be.
No, but the small project budget on the CIP would be like
today that number's
$12 million or something.
Today that number's $500,000 a year. So it's very, very small. $500,000 a year.
Right now, as it presented, which is where a lot of this discussion came up was, what's the CIP? Is it a guiding from an auditing standpoint, from our oversight component? Because there's an efficiency standpoint, which I think we all agree makes sense, but there's also an oversight that we're tasked with. So trying to figure out what that is. Right now, the CIP, small projects, and there's no guiding force on what goes under small projects on the CIP right now. So what the 500,000 is, I don't even know what it was for. But outside of that, we have a number of small projects that never make it to the CIP, and we have under design builds that are authorized, but then we have no guiding force on when it comes to us and when it doesn't. So to summarize, now it's a 325 threshold. But my question with that would be, and we've talked about this, Scott, so I know, the bundling, and we name them HVAC for some, because that seems to be that's the winner. If you populate all the major projects, HVAC is definitely the one we use a lot.
We're also going to make a change there.
Okay,
yes,
that's what But going to that point is, when you're opening up those walls, there are opportunities to save and fix items at that current plan. If you have multiple, if that sub project is under, you can have multiple 325s within one bundled project under the 325. Would that not come to the board? Or no? Does that make sense? Because you have a total budget. Do you have a total budget for the actual project itself?
We do. And so I guess separate that from the conversation about design build, because those big, what we're calling HVAC projects, are not awarded under design build. They're competed.
Right.
They're a major project because they're generally $12 million or so across the campus. And when Jody refers to bundling, we're talking about things like, if while we're on that campus, the facilities team would say, it's time for us to be looking at upgrading our fire suppression system or our alarm system. In the facilities budget is a line for fire alarm. So Jody would transfer the money for fire alarm into the Venice Middle project. So you've already allocated it for fire alarm. We would move it to the Venice Middle project and say to whoever the CM was on that project, while you're there, will you also include upgrading our fire suppression system or fire alarm system? Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Wait,
Getting to the $30 million.
wait, I just want to, Jody, real quick, did you?
No, I was going to say that's absolutely correct. And so where we use a lot of these design build contracts is money that's in capital budgets in our departments for whether it's facilities maintenance, whether it's safety and security. That's where a lot of these design build contracts are being utilized. And that's coming to you in CIP under the department budgets. So if you look under facility services, for example, you're going to have a line item that says carpet and paint, HVAC. There's a number of line items in there, renovations. And then if you said, hey, I want to see what that is, they're budgeted by department and facilities. So if we were going to go to Goshio and we're going to renovate Building 3, there's a line item in my budget that says we're there and it's $500,000. So that's where you're going to see that detail in terms of what's going on and where these projects are being bundled is into the department budget.
Okay, the breakdown.
So those are not coming back to you. So you allocate it in the CIP and you see it as facility services roofing. And Jody will then use design build contracts to spend that roofing money on the projects that his roofing analysis says need to be done. We don't come back to you for each of those individual projects. You approve the CIP budget that says roofing, $500,000.
It doesn't say roofing in the name of the school in the CIP? Typically, I thought the CIP included them. But okay, let's go to the $30 million, which is what we had before. So that $30 million that was allocated for the design build, will that $30 million show, was that for 2 years? Or 3 years?
2-year contract.
2-year contract, 30 million. So $15 million. It's called 15. Well, I see in the next CIP plan an additional line item for $15 million.
No. So the $30 million says we can use design build up to that authority on all of these things that are in the CIP.
$1 million per, right? It's
Correct.
a maximum of $1 million total, $30 million
That's
in
right.
1
Anything
year.
bigger than $1 million, we would
have to go back
project in.
But you understand how that creates a frustration for us when our capital dollars get cut and we're trying to figure out how to balance the stuff. There's a $30 million pot over here that's not even part of our discussion.
But there's no money tied to that.
Think of it as an umbrella. Is that $30 million is not a budget allocation. It
Right.
could be roofing, it could be paint, it could be HVAC, it could be a small project. And so your ability to control the budget is in those allocations. And so there's a budgeting function, which you're intimately involved in, and then there's kind of the allocation process and the assignment of work, which is more the core of today's conversation. Is each one of those budget items came before the board.
Yeah.
They utilize how are you going to spend the roofing money through a design build contract. So many times the money in the roofing and the $30 million, it's one and the same.
But you understand how it puts us in a quagmire where we're sitting there saying, okay, we need to cut our capital dollars because our capital dollars are less. Let's cut out Venice Middle's, outdoor eating facility. Instead of, you may have done something, I would not agree with that.
Well, but my advice to you would be to cut the roofing budget, to cut project budgets, to not say, bring me a list of roofing projects and we'll make political decisions as a board who gets a new roof. Say, to get to a $30 million savings, I want to cut the roofing budget by X,
Right.
and then allow staff to determine the most pressing needs within that category.
I just want to finish what I was saying is I don't want to be in a position where I cut something that was painful, and then I find out that we end up doing renovations at, the landings instead. And I'm like, oh my God, we could have used that money at that school. But the list of things that we had at the table to cut were all school-related projects, and I didn't even know about if it was up to me, I would have said, keep the thing at Venice Middle and cut the landings. But because the landings wasn't on the table for me to make my discussion, it puts me in a very bad position. So I'm just saying is, if I have to sit there and make cuts, I want to be able to look, I want to know all the stuff that's on the table, including the stuff that's not presented in front of me.
Okay, so
is that fair?
Absolutely. Can we address the elephant in the room?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Landings project. There is not a renovation project underway at the Landings. There is misinformation. I believe it's intentional about what is happening at the Landings. Currently, there is an architect studying the needs at the Landings. To date is the number $26,000 that has been expended.
Yeah.
There is not a $450,000 project underway.
46.
There's not the first hammer that has been swung here at the Landings.
Well, not just Landings. If I have to cut Project X,
I know you use it as an example, but I think it's necessary to address a misperception that is out there.
But you understand my issue is if I have to cut Project X, which is painful, and then I find out later there was Project Y that I would have cut, I'm not going to be happy because I would want to see Project X and Project Y together and say, I think X is more important than Y. But if I only see X, then I'm going to make those decisions.
So the decision that you need to make collectively as a board is where do you want to draw that line?
That's what I was just
Do you
gonna
want to draw that line at 325? Do you want to draw it at 250? Do you want to draw it at 150? Where do you want to draw the line at which you say this is a decision of the board and that is a decision of staff? And that is completely your purview.
And that's going to your point, because that was my concern, and there was no continuity to some degree in the past when we would bring things forward and we didn't have that threshold. So if you use the example that was just addressed, it didn't make sense. Why are we having this feeling of, oh my gosh, we're sharing capital dollars with charter schools, but yet we have to figure out what we're going to do, and then X, Y, and Z, whether it was truth or not, there are a couple of them came through. So I think we've all had that conversation, and that's where you guys came to this. Right. My concern is, and what I think the board really needs to consider is the differences with the thresholds on page 17 under S. You have the $2 million capital improvement budget not to exceed that $2 million threshold. And I don't know if that was also sub-projects, because we changed the language to statutory authority, and it was previously 1 million. So and whatever. So I think that's a huge jump. So making sure that the board knows if as this is presented, if we were to adopt it, that has changed. And then you have the 325, which in discussions with staff, I think that was that was a threshold. One, it's in statute, but two, under what, small projects, is that the 325?
It's statutory too. The 325.
Correct.
As Mr. Hardy mentioned.
And so again, going back to the efficiency aspect, but where's that balance? So I think those are the key components of the major changes, and to avoid the confusion, we would be authorizing, in my opinion, based on these changes, more discretion to the staff to make those decisions beyond our budget approval process. Right? Is that a fair? I mean,
well,
yeah. And
you're still. Go ahead.
May I just comment though?
Yeah.
In terms of the change from 1 million to 2 million, it doesn't change the projects you would see. Right. It just authorizes which ones we can get under contract. So, for example, we've been using the limit of $1 million for 10, 12 years now, maybe more than that. Let me give you an example of a project right now. We are doing some renovations at the VPA at Booker High School, and we're doing sound and lighting in there. We're going to bump up against that $1 million contract limit right away.
Yep.
And so just in terms of timeline and cost and the way things have kind of increased over the years, 1 million 10 years ago is 2 million today. And so it gives us the ability to kind of do the work we used to be doing under the contracts and still get that work done. So it gives us problems at this point only having that $1 million cap, because things just have gotten more expensive.
But it isn't.
But in any case, all those projects under this language will still come in front of you under the CIP. So whether you give us the $1 million or $2 million approval, you will still see all those projects over 325 in the CIP and be able to make the decisions you're talking about, Eric. Listen, hey, we need to cut the capital budget. Let's look at the roofing budget and let's drop these projects off to be able to do something else.
But theoretically, I could prove a $500,000 project at Booker, and then it becomes $2.5 million.
yeah. Well,
Not without coming back to you, though.
Let's talk about that. So let's say you approve the capital budget, okay, and you've looked at it and it goes forward, and so there's money in several categories. There's roofing budget, there's carpet budget, there's paint budget, there's the project going on at Booker High School. As long as we're under $2 million and you've approved all of that money, that project at Booker High School, maybe for the meat of the project, maybe the lighting is going to be $1 million. But we want to, at our same time, in the carpet budget, we've approved approved another $150,000 to recarpet. So we'll put those two together. So that may be $1.1 million when the project is let, but you will have proved all of that under the capital budget in different categories. Does that make sense? So you will have the ability to look at that. Anything over 325, you'll have the ability to say yes or no.
Well, and if I may, with the $2 million, there are two different and distinct issues with the $2 million. The first is what type of project can be let at all using the continuing contracts. And the current policy says it has to be $1 million or less. And that was statutory at some point when this was done. Since then, the statute has moved up to $2 million. So that just talks about what project is available to be assigned, and now we're suggesting it goes up to $2 million. That has nothing to do with what projects the board has to approve. That gets us to S1, and what this says, of course, is the board has to approve every contract except, and one is the $2 million if it's in the capital improvement budget. That is not statutory. You could say that $2 million should be $1 million, that or whatever number. But if you approve the other change, you're saying that we can use the continuing contract process to do a $1.5 million project, which I think is what Jody is saying is important for him. If it's $1.5 million project, and this is as it is, then you won't see that again if it's in your CIP. If you cut this $2 million to $1 million, then you could still do, the staff could still do the $1.5 million, but you would have to approve the contract, but you could do it in that way. So those are, to some extent, apples and oranges. One is just what mechanism can be used, and that, I think, is the most important issue for the staff, at least. The second issue is at what level, whether it's $10 or $2 million, does the board need to approve the actual contract? So those numbers don't have to be the same. It is in this proposal, but it doesn't have to be.
So S1's kind of an auditing to the discussion. I think, at least I know I had, was an audit, a cross-reference, is that it's not statute driven. We utilize numbers and thresholds from statute to kind of make it consistent, but S1
correct, but it doesn't have to be. The only statutory number is under the statute, you can let projects up to $2 million with continuing contracts. We can't do that currently under our policy. Our policy limits us, and we can do that. You can always have a lower number, but staff's telling you that's somewhat problematic. The second issue, all the S numbers are non-statutory. I mean, honestly, I'm not suggesting this, but you don't need to have 1, 2, or 3 at all.
Right.
You could say if it's a contract for 10 cents, it has to come to the board. I wouldn't recommend that, but whether you want 2 million or some other number, 325 or some other number, that's totally in the board's discretion. That is not driven by statute.
Did you have a comment?
No, I think he's done a great job of framing. There's two questions of any project, and there's the budget allocation of, is it work we should be doing, and then there's the assignment or selection of who's going to do the work. And they're really two distinct questions of, should we be adding a covered dining room? Should we be doing renovation work at the landings? That's the selection of projects, the budgeting process, and that takes place in a variety of ways. And then the assignment of work, which contractor. And so in my conversations with staff, it is very important that once budget allocations are made, and very respectful, that's the purview of the board, is that their hands not be tied in their ability to get people in to do the work. Am I correctly summarizing our conversation?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, go ahead, Shirley.
My question's on the same page, but it's a little further up in R. Assignments may be affected by firms the fairest extent possible. I'm not sure which one of you has the expertise to answer this, but it looks to me like may be affected. Effective is a verb in that, and my rule was affective is an action, and you would use an A. Effective is an end result, and you would use an E. So which would you prefer to use on that?
You're talking
Or am
about
I,
the sentence that reads,
or am I giving you one that's a little over your head, over your pay grade?
Well, we may need the English teachers to weigh in.
It should be an A.
I think A, affected, is only a verb. I think E, affected, can be a noun or a verb. But I certainly don't think it would be wrong to make
Words
it
matter in
A.
contracts or policy.
I agree.
Okay. Well, go to page. Al used to appreciate my looking at those types of things, and on page 11, it talks about MH
11 of
price and schedule. Yeah, 11 of 11. What? Yeah, how do you get page 17 of 11?
I think it has to do with redlining. I think it was started as an 11-page policy that got a lot
That's right.
bigger with the strike-throughs.
It talks about looking at price and schedule. We ran into an issue when we were looking at the price of who we were assigning a project to. What does this price refer to?
Where are you, Shirley?
On page 11 of 11.
Which subparagraph?
M.
And it's MH.
So the first thing I would point out, notice that this says selection for design build single projects. That's a component of this policy that in the 15 years I've been here, we have never used. Correct me. Oh, we used it for one school, didn't we?
One school, which was Cranberry Elementary.
That's right. So it's a provision of the contract. So this says we're going to use a design.
Yep.
Cranberry Elementary was the one.
I think so.
It's on. Cranberry Elementary was the one project that we actually did a total design build process
project.
for a major project.
Yeah. Just making the point that it's a provision of the policy we don't use very often. Major projects like the building of a school are typically through PSSC, through the complete, you make a presentation. So the issue of price doesn't come into the conversation at the front end of the policy. I don't know if that answered your question.
And this language, although it's underlined, is language from the current policy.
Right, we changed it after. We changed it at the ad hoc committee, I believe. We removed the pricing component, so there was an ambiguity around that, I believe. Is that correct? During when we did the ad hoc committee and what the rankings were, we removed the price component of it.
Not here. We didn't know. No.
No, we did that for the CM, a risk selection scoring procedure and categories. We did not address any changes to the design build single large projects.
So I'm not suggesting you can't change it. I'm just telling you that even though it's underlined, it is not a proposed change.
Right.
And go back. So we typically on major projects defined as, what's the threshold for major projects?
Over $1 million under the current policy.
But when I've heard you say we don't typically for major projects, I've heard 12 million used for like well, I thought, so when do we do PSSC versus design build?
Currently, anything over $1 million.
Okay.
That's the current threshold.
Okay.
And proposed?
$2 million.
Okay. Eric, did you have anything? Go ahead.
No, some would want to go back to Dr. Bowden. I agree that we shouldn't get involved in the selection of vendors, but I do want to say it did give me pause when I saw the distribution of the work amongst the vendor, pre-approved vendor list. It was definitely skewed towards two people.
For a couple of reasons, if I could address that. First of all, this is essentially a 3-year contract, and we just rolled to the new contract July 1 of this summer. So we're at the very front end of trying to make the pieces of that pie all the same. Second is I'll use Classrooms of Tomorrow and MES as my example. Very often you have a firm, all of our Classrooms of Tomorrow at the middle schools pretty much have been done by McIntyre, Elwell, Strammer.
That's correct.
And as a result of that, if we're going to do something else with COT, it just makes sense to go back to that same firm and say, you guys understand what we're trying to do. You understand what the difficulties have been. It's kind of like the wisdom of using Willis Smith to build STC South or STC Northport, that they understand what we're trying to do. We'll have firms that if we were going to do something at Sarasota High School, for example, we would likely go to Tandem first because Tandem has knowledge of the campus. So it's not just making the math balance. It's who has experience or knowledge of the particular kind of work.
I understand, but it did look did look very skewed. Do you agree with
does,
that, right?
Yes, it does
Okay.
today. By the end of 3 years, our goal collectively would be by the end of that 3-year contract, you look at that pie, and it's much closer to 1/8, 1/8, 1/8 than it is today.
I'm not trying to say that if you think Tandem would be the best one or that McIntyre would be. I mean, I'm not here to get involved in those type of decisions. Those are within your purview, and I agree. I'm just saying I hope that at the end of 3 years you are correct and it is more evenly distributed.
And the policy challenges the Director of Construction Services to do that.
And I don't expect them to be exactly equal. I mean, I understand
Can't
that
someone who's
the
good,
thing,
but-
if you do a lot of classrooms tomorrow, then that McIntyre is going to have a bigger chunk of the pie, and then if you did little work on Sarasota High, so Tandem maybe less. I mean,
Right.
I understand that, but it shouldn't be as skewed as it is now. Hopefully, as we get more data points and more projects, it becomes more evenly distributed.
You're four months into a 36-month
Okay.
contract. That's part of what you're saying.
I just want to make sure I got that.
Message.
So our big question is whether $2 million is okay. That's what you're asking us?
I
And
think
if you're
that's a
comfortable with the
major
assignment.
component to change.
And the 325.
Right. And the
audit of the CIP, there's a more clear definition of what goes on there, what doesn't, and then where we go if we have questions under that 325. It's allocated. We do that authority in the budgeting process. Is that a fair? Yes. You're not.
Yes.
Well, and just so the point of today is obviously to get your feedback on this. Then when we get the feedback, just like we did with the challenge policy a couple of meetings ago, to get a new proposal to make whatever changes need to be made in this, and then to get it on an agenda to advertise it, to get it into the queue so that we can get this changed. So
That's our work.
Probably the primary point of feedback is subparagraph S, I would think.
Yep. I have just one question. Well, I want to make sure we wrap up on this, and I don't know if it falls under 7.71 under professional services continuing contract. I don't think it does. I just want to be clear when we talk about contracts, and it goes before the board. And it says not to exceed, because I think it would be kind of under the professional services because it's an ongoing, it's not a specific allocation. So if X vendor goes before the board for 3-year annual contract for a 2-year single extension with a threshold of X, let's use $500,000, and we approve that in that annual year, that means services invoicing purchase orders are not supposed to exceed that $500,000 threshold in that given year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the event that there is an increase, does that come before the board, or is that done via email?
That it depends on the size of the increase, I believe. So many times during the year, you will get emails from Carol LaShawn on bids where we've had, our T&C is $300,000. We anticipate spending another $100,000. That comes to the board via email. So a lot of them come like that.
Okay.
But I believe on this size of a contract where it was a $30 million contract, that would not come via email. That would probably be a board action to say we want to increase that contract to X.
So what is that threshold, though? Do we know? And this may not be 7.71. I know we talked about this.
Correct. It's not 7.71, and it also has some additional layers in regards to the budgeting process, and that's a contract that we are piggybacking, and so that's part of the issue. It's not a construction contract.
No, it's not. But we do similar contracts.
Time and a half. Well, almost 3 times the original. I mean, there's bigger questions.
Okay, so to your point, though, we have a X 500,000. We'll just use that threshold. And so but you're saying there is, if it were to increase to 100,000, we would send those via email.
Yeah.
Where do we have that threshold? Because I want to make sure your staff also has some guidance, and we don't go say, "Hey, where'd this come from?" And you said, "Well, we had the authority to do so."
So typically on one of our bids, let's say fencing, for example. This is a good example of one that recently happened. So on fencing, we have typically what we spent over the last courses of those contracts. And when we go to purchasing and they put it out to bid for us, they'll say this is a bid for fencing supplies and labor, and it's going to be for $300,000 over 2 years. And that's based on some previous work that we've done. And Carol Carl puts that out so the vendor knows exactly, how much work am I getting? What's my pricing look like? Something may change. And for example, the security budget was just upped. It become one of the priorities for the board. And so we're doing a lot more fencing. So in those cases, we didn't know it up front. So we are going to spend over that $300,000 because of some of the fencing money that's coming through the capital budget. That would come back to the board via email and say, that contract needs to be increased by $100,000 to be able to cover anticipated expenses. So that would indeed come back in front of you for informational purposes.
But in
budget,
over an
budget's
email.
been acted on in the
CIP.
Safety and Security Department CIP budget in Jody's example.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
When you do that, though, you say you're going to be increasing this contract by, another $300,000 or $2 million. Can you not also tell us where those funds are coming from?
Absolutely, we can, and that's certainly.
I think that would clear up some of the confusion, because that's not a new budget. You're just moving it from here to there, and I think if you told us where it was coming from, we would be, at least I would be happier. I would think Eric would too. I mean, because that's what we want to make Eric happy.
Yeah,
No, I mean, it's coming from the budget, and so the point is, when you see a change order happening at one of the school sites, so we're talking about Venice Middle as an example, and you have a question of why is that contract being increased, to say that money is coming from the roofing budget, that money is, so you could answer for yourself, well, when did I ever approve that we could answer for you, that we're taking it out of the roofing line item, we're paying it out of paint and carpet, we're taking it out of small projects, so that well,
I would look at it
why are you not coming back?
Then if I found out you were taking out of Sarasota High, I mean, I would say I would look at it.
That's actually a great point, and I think that's the central, the efficiency standpoint.
Shirley Brown does it again.
No, well, and I think that's where, at least I know our conversation is, it's not to bog you guys down. I mean, there's an efficiency standpoint, which you're doing business with people who don't want to, you need to act when you have circumstances come up. And I think that I can only speak for myself, but I certainly believe that that's what I want you guys to do, just having the framework so we know when it's coming before us and when it's not. And if you were able to line it out as to where that money's coming from, I think that would be very helpful.
I can't imagine a circumstance, and maybe there is one, so correct me if I'm wrong, I can't imagine a circumstance where we would spend fund reserve money without a formal action of the board. I can imagine moving roofing money to a project to do roofing work. I can imagine moving fence money to a project to do fence work. I can't imagine a circumstance under which we would say a project is over budget, we need to dip into the fund reserve and do that without a formal action of the board. Not an email, a formal action of the board. I just can't imagine us ever doing that.
That's
Eric and Jody.
No, that circumstance does not exist.
It just, yeah.
Right.
All right.
So just to circle back to the end, Ms. Brown already made her. I guess, $2 million does make me nervous, but, I don't want to impede your ability. I don't want to get in your, stay in my lane, so to speak. it does make me nervous, but in my lane, when it comes to CIP and budget, this is the board's area.
Yep.
I want to see in the CIP plan all those numbers. I don't want to ever say that I cut a particular project at a school and then find out that there's some other project that was done for the same amount of money over here that was never put on the table for me when I'm to have to, that's my lane. And so I don't want that to occur.
So are you comfortable with unnamed projects beneath 325?
I'm talking about the $2 million. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Right, because that would be the time in which you didn't see a named project. And so when you say, I want to be able to decide, do I want to do project X or project Y, if those projects fall below 325, that may not come before you, and this is your time to say, well, I'd like to vet projects at a different level.
Jody.
Unless they're funded in a department budget, competing roofing projects, competing fencing, because right now you don't see the school level detail there, and frankly, I don't know why you would, but you won't see what school we're going to do roof work at, even if that work exceeds $325,000.
It only comes in play when you're asking me to cut.
Yep.
When you're asking me to cut, I want to know all my choices. I don't want for you to do this, and then find out over here it went up $2 million, this project that I only wanted to give $500,000 to. I thought, well, $500,000 for that school, that's okay, but I would never have agreed to $2.5 million. Meanwhile, I had to cut $2 million out of some VPK program or some social. That would not make me happy.
But Dr. Bowden made a good point earlier that if you're in the mode of having to cut, for me, the policy decision is let's reduce the roofing budget by X, not let's decide which school does and does not get a roof.
Yeah.
And then there's a subtle but significant difference there.
But the CIP has individual school and projects.
At certain levels. And so I think what Scott's referring to is when you look into department budgets, you're going to see a level of detail, at least currently, the level of detail you will see is, for example, typically our roofing budget runs about $1 million a year. So if you look into the CIP right now and you look on department budgets, facility services, you're going to see a line item for roofing, re-roofing, $1 million. Okay. Now, if you guys wanted to see what drove that $1 million for next year, you could. I could provide that to you, but that's not in the level of detail of the capital budget right now. Right. I think what Scott's saying is if we have a problem in the capital budget and needs to be reduced by $5 million, you would say categorically, why don't we look at these categories, and we could come back and say we could reduce.
But there's a difference between the capital budget and the CIP.
No, I think I know exactly.
CIP is a 5-year plan. It has individual projects. So, capital budget may just say roofing,
It's both.
Budget year one.
Hold on. So because I know exactly. So the CIP has both, and you'll have priority year 1 through 5, and it will say Cranberry Elementary, Venice Middle, whatever, and you'll have it as VA. Let's just use, we're going to pick on HVAC because it's a major project, and those are typically listed in year 1 through 5, and we have only authority by approving year 1, but our plan is 5 years because obviously they move forward.
That's correct.
And where we get the funding from, and then underneath that on the CIP, then we also have nominal amounts of various departmental expenditures. That's accurate?
Absolutely correct.
So where I think we have been in a position of is go to the named projects with a school site tied to it. I don't think, me personally, if I approve it on the budget and I approve it in the CIP and it's roofing or security of X $1 million, that means if you need to flush them around to go to various schools, I would be okay with that. It's the named projects that we have to push from year 1 to year 5, even though it's been on there for 3 years. And then you have items under, and let's use this scenario, 325 now. Would you be okay with that? That's, I think, where our decision making has to come today. Does that make sense? Is that
very
okay? Shirley.
I think going back to that elephant you brought up earlier. Again, reiterate that we didn't have a $400,000 or $500,000 renovation project at the landings, and I think maybe to make it even more transparent, to say, well, okay, you can move your $325,000 around, do what you need, but if you're going to spend that money at the landings, I want to know about it. I mean, I don't care if it's $375, you got to bring it back. I want to know if you're going to be spending $150,000 on the landings, because that just happens to be the hot spots. Sure. And let's address it up front rather than at the back end, and we have to deal with it.
All right, so let me drill down so I understand, so we can get some guidance there. Is it any non-school site? Would you have the same concerns about Fruitville or the bus garage? Is it non-school sites, or is it the landing?
I think non-school sites.
I think that's another Brown plan.
And you would draw that line
I often wonder why I'm sitting here.
And you would draw that line at 150? Is I think what you put on the table.
Whatever Ms. Brown says.
I would say, it's 150 at a non-school site.
Are you interested? Let me ask for a category now. Are you interested in maintenance type items? So if we're going to so a carpet is a 10-year life cycle. If we know
knowing how he does maintenance, no.
if we know that we're going to replace the carpet on the second floor of Maroon because it's over 10 years old, do you want to know about that if it's $150,000, or are you just looking for renovation type items?
I'd say renovation.
But I think I'm glad you brought that up, because you're very systematic about maintenance and the life cycles, and so it's not there's less objectivity to it. It's much more life cycle and strategically planned versus other elements that sometimes don't fall into that play. So
Right. Okay.
Scott, have you captured
I think
that? Okay.
that's what we're talking about.
Well, that's what we're talking about now. So what we're saying then in the sub 2, in S sub 2.
That's back on page 17 of 11.
17 of 11, yes.
17 of 11.
These are the contracts that don't have to come back before the board. And right now it says renovation or new construction contracts not specifically listed in the capital improvement budget that do not exceed $325,000
For schools.
at school sites, or $150,000 at non-school sites. Is that capturing what you all want?
Because it says renovation or new construction.
The Brown plan.
I like that.
That's easy enough.
I think that's a great ad. I think that's very much, and again, going back to, not to be super redundant, but I think you guys you absolutely, are the professionals, you want to have the authority and efficiency to do so, but we sit in a position, so to Eric's point, when we go through that budget, and it takes that part very seriously, we have to make sure we know what we're approving, CIP, and then run with it. But I like the add-on of the non-school sites because that makes it's tough. I mean, it's tough, and I think you guys understand that because it's having to make.
And the other change that we're looking at is to tell us when you're increasing a bid, or not a bid, a contract from 300,000 to 600,000 or whatever. You're telling us where that's coming from.
Absolutely.
Where the funding is coming from. Okay. And I don't know which policy that's not in this. That's not. No, I didn't review that. No. Well, no, that's not a 7.0. So okay. So, Eric, do you have any more?
People ask me why I feel so strongly about Shirley Brown, and this is today. The last 30 minutes is just crystal clear to everybody why I feel the way I do about Shirley.
Good. She's as red as her shirt right now. So no.
She's not going to use that in her campaign. I know
I am really pleased with I know this topic has come up a lot. I've brought it up a lot. I think the changes to getting rid of the redundancy. I mean, there was definitely due time to revamp, facelift this policy. But I think and I hope that your feedback is that it gives. I mean, it's reasonable. It's not micromanaged, but that there's clear indications of what that roadmap looks like. Is that
We have to happy with the results.
okay?
All right, so I will make the changes that we just talked about.
Correct.
150 will make affected, and everything else is going to stay the same. And it will be back before the board, perhaps in the December, to put it out for advertisement, because this is not a big.
Very good. And then if the other board members who aren't able to be here today have any additional, I mean, they'll reach out to you and make that known before it comes before the board.
You bet.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. Very exciting.
And when we get the CIP plan, it's going to be more robust. So we're going to thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay. And Circus Lease is not on the board meeting tonight, but we are discussing it today at workshop.
Strictly informational, just to get some direction, but no, there is no action item. Before we leave 771, may I ask Scott to just clarify some items that are going to be on your board agenda this evening, that we just wanted to cure some ambiguity. So there are a number of contracts that are included on this evening's board agenda that were done out of an abundance of caution, just because the current 771 is a little ambiguous.
Sure. And so essentially what we said is the whole conversation about assignment, who had the authority to do assignments. So we went back about 90 days, said any contract that had been assigned, we will create a board action. So there are a number on your consent agenda today. There are things that Mr. Smith would have assigned under the old 771 prior to you acting on these changes, that just as Dr. Bowden said, out of an abundance of caution, we put them on your consent agenda. I think there are 6 or 8, and every one of them, as you talk about the fund source, we tried to be clear on where the money was coming from for each of those projects.
And I also want to be very specific that you may have seen those items before in an email coming out of Jody and Mark's office, that those are one and the same and not duplicate for second project.
Contract. It's just for clarification. It's almost retrospective.
But things that get signed by the chairman going along this thing have to be the chairman's action on behalf of the board because the board approved their ability to sign it.
The chairman should only sign things that are board approved.
They don't have superpowers. They can't talk to the animals or talk to the fish, right?
Well, I won't speak for any of those issues, but they can't sign contracts without the board approval.
They can only prove it if they was approved by the board.
Right. Assuming 771 that we just talked about becomes the board policy, you are now delegating for those certain numbers of contracts under S, and the board chair won't be signing those. It'll be the superintendent or designee who are signing those with your approval pursuant to your policy.
Correct. So no stamps or anything like that. It's designees. That's an important clarification.
Just the way you said it, I want to clarify, is when those 8 contracts were let originally, they were let under board action and will contain the signature of the board chair. The individual assignments within those allocations would take place by staff and include my signature.
Going forward?
Yes.
Going forward, I think for the sub S contracts, you can sign them. You have been delegated the authority to sign them.
Right.
Okay. But the 8 blanket contracts will still come before the board on 3-year cycles.
Oh, no, yes. The continuing contracts themselves will have to be board approved.
So if you sign someone goes from $500,000 to $2 million, then you're taking on that responsibility for how we feel about it.
So okay,
if you don't tell us.
I think when was the date? May 13th when we did the design build pre-approved.
Right.
May something. I know we had to go.
We approved the list of vendors only.
This is the action right here. It was May 16th.
May 16th. Yeah. And so that action item allowed the continuing contracts to continue, which was board assigned.
Right, and those were board approved and presumably signed by the chair.
And then the ones coming forward today have already been, they're pursuant to that action.
Projects.
Correct, but weren't signed by a board member. They're signed by a designee of the superintendent or superintendent's designee. Is that clear? Is that correct?
Well,
our previous practice was they were going back to the board chair for assignment based on staff recommendations. And now we're returning those to the board because of the ambiguity. Once this policy is accepted, I will begin signing those because it will be crystal clear that that's been designated to the superintendent.
So do we have contracts right now that were signed that are coming back? To go back to your point.
Yes.
You're ratifying those tonight or this afternoon.
Okay.
But if you have a bunch of contracts that you're signing that go from $500 to $2.5 million, and you do that 10 times, I mean, I would think that at a certain point you'd probably start, communicating to us, hey, this is what's happening.
Well, and 771, as proposed, specifically says even in those 3 categories of times that authority has been delegated that you will be notified. I don't remember what the exact words, but you'll be notified immediately that this is happening. So you'll always know. You just
which mechanism is which we're notified and whether it's the board approved or not. The thing about the design build in 513, 16. I keep wanting to say 13. It had a cap. Of 10 million, 30 million.
30 million, right.
Correct?
Right.
For 1 year. And is there a cap in our policy, or is that was just specific on those contracts? I don't think 7.71.
There's nothing in 771. This just says over the 3-year period you can go to 30 million. And we've actually busted that number once. We've come back to the board to move it because we got close at least one time where we were exceeding the 30 million.
Yeah, the 771 doesn't have
a cap on
that because the board can do as much or as little as it wants.
Okay. But I think that's where, okay. I think I got my answer. So.
Okay.
It's really.
Not to interrupt this kumbaya moment that we're having, and I think some of it will may be changing in this next legislative session, but we're really focusing on how we're spending these dollars. I would still like to see some sort of plan coming from our charter schools now, if in fact this is going to be continuing. But I know we don't need to do anything yet. We got a legislative session coming up. There's some court challenges out there. But I think if that is a continuing thing, that we might want to look at what or if oversight we would have on those dollars. That's just something that I'm throwing out there for the future. I don't expect us to take any action in the near future, but let's see what happens at the end of the session. And if, in fact, we need to look at some things so that those dollars are being spent correctly. And in our county, because there isn't even anything right now that says those dollars can't leave our county. I mean, we want to make sure those being used on the school sites that we have, at the very least.
And I think that's contractual. That would take place at the contract level of the charter agreement, not, I mean, in the event.
As long as it's something we're permitted to.
I was going to say, there are guidelines as to, and that's up to them whether they sign it or not, or it should be challenged again. So that's complex. But I hear you. Well, I'm good on 7.71, so thank you very much. Everyone, Todd, you good? Shirley? I'm good. All right, thank you. Art, Circus lease.
Sailor Circus, as the board is aware, you have a long-term lease with Circus Sarasota to lease the Sailor Circus property on the Sarasota High campus. The circus has approached us saying they're going to be doing some substantial renovations there. In order to do that, they tell us they need to obtain a bridge loan with a bank. Well, they know they're going to be getting some money in the latter half of next year, but they want to get construction started before that. So they have come to us and asked for basically some dispensation under their lease, which doesn't allow any kinds of encumbrances, et cetera. I won't go through everything, but there's been a little bit of back and forth. And the option that I believe is the most appropriate for the board to consider, and obviously this is up to you, it's a policy issue, but the bank is willing to accept something called a landlord's waiver, which allows the bank, in the case of a default, to take property back from Circus Sarasota. Not a mortgage like you have on your house, but a security interest in property.
So like a UCC1?
I don't know that it will technically be that, but I think it's that's akin to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a little bit ambiguous, at least to my reading, as they presented it, as to exactly what rights the bank would have. I wanted to ensure from the board's perspective that the bank would not get any rights vis-a-vis the board at all. So I suggested to Scott that we add another paragraph that says, notwithstanding anything else in this agreement, the bank, one, can't assume the tenant's rights. I didn't want that to be something so that the bank would somehow be the lessee of this property. And second, that they wouldn't have any rights in permanent improvements to the facility, because under our lease, when the lease is up, the school board keeps all the permanent improvements. So I am told the bank has agreed to that. Because of the holiday, we haven't gotten all the paperwork done, which is why it's not on your agenda today. But I'm comfortable from a legal perspective that that protects the board's interests in the property. If the bank, not that I expect this to happen, but if Circus Sarasota defaulted on the loan and the bank wanted to come in and take the personal property that the circus has there, costumes, money, equipment, that's not.
So when you talk about non-permanent, I'm sorry.
I have it on good authority that they are meeting with the bank tomorrow, but that they also have obtained a letter from a very prominent law firm in town that's handling the estate of someone who has left them a sizable contribution that will definitely put them over the amount that they're asking. They might not need it now. I don't know.
Right.
But even so, I know that the board members have also agreed to sign personal responsibility if anything happened. I think that the holdup is right on the bank right now.
Right. So, I mean, I was trying to come up with a way, Scott and I were, in making this work so the circus could do what they want while protecting the board, recognizing it's always in your prerogative to do it.
So bottom line is they're going to have a lien against tangible personal property, not real property.
Yes.
Then I'm fine with that.
Good answer. And I also think that, it would be a good for them, I don't know if we've got it scheduled, for them to come and show us, what they're doing. I mean, I don't know anybody who has ever sat through a Circus Sarasota performance that said, boy, that was a great performance, but God, it's hot in here. So getting that air conditioning will be great for those who come to see it, but also for those poor kids who are working up in the ceilings of that building, and the bathroom renovations and some of those other things. I think it'd be good to not only show the board what those plans are, but also show the public what those plans are. And
I
would hope that maybe under the superintendent's time that we could do that in the near future.
So Caroline has asked, we had a couple conversations by email over the Thanksgiving break, and Caroline asked for a couple of things, and that was one of them. She said, and she asked me to share this with you today. One of them was, under their operating agreement, there's a couple of things that they're obligated to do, include a certain number of students in Sailor Circus each year and a certain number of performances. So Caroline asked, can you have them kind of prove that? And those are my words, not hers, but document for us that that's happened. And the second is, ask them to bring to the board, whether we do it in a work session or part of superintendent's report, bring to the board what their renovation plans are. And I have every reason to believe they'll be
I would think they would be happy to do that, because
Sure.
I understand the enrollments are up and there's actually waiting lists.
Yep.
So I think they'd be happy to do that.
Very good.
You probably haven't seen it yet, but I actually responded to Caroline this morning, and I infoed you, say, let me talk with Dr. Bowden about how we want to do this with the board. But
So we expect on your December agenda to have this the approval of the landlord's waiver so that they can get their loan and get started.
Okay.
So will you extend an invitation to them to come and present that evening in your conversations with them? I think
Yes.
it's natural that if there's an action to be taken on their lease, that they come and give that information at that time. I think 3 weeks notice. Yep.
and assuming that PNC accepts the language that Mr. Hardy has proposed, what we've done is move that to the December 12th board, so it'd be your next board that they'd act on.
If they do a performance, I don't know if we could raise the ceiling so we could have.
Do something on the ground.
Oh, I guess we could. Well, all right. Maybe they'd stay with ground entertainment.
Didn't they swing a board member from the tent one year? I'm seriously, I think they did.
Mr.
I wish
Robinson,
I'd seen
are you volunteering?
I think that was a city commissioner.
I think
That was the mayor, right? That was the mayor.
it was Barbara Shirley.
Really?
It was Barbara Shirley.
Well, I know that you can bid on getting lessons with dolly
Can we
and
nominate
swinging.
people? Just kidding. We're breaking for lunch now. I think we're all set though. No, really. No. Do you want to finish? I'm actually fine. Are you okay with that? Are you starving? You starving?
I think we're good.
I could have gone home and.
We almost had you.
Yeah, let's. I think we can knock these out very quickly, right?
Okay.
Well, these are actually member items. They're not
Yeah.
staff presentations.
I don't know where. But, here it is.
They're quick. That first item was the Broward sales tax to schools. I don't know if I shared it with the whole board, and I know I shared it with Joe over there. Broward County was yaying how they were using the dollars that they get from the sales tax fee from businesses that they can use on technology. And apparently when businesses fill out a sales tax form, they can check off and they get to keep a percentage of it.
A very small percentage.
A very small percentage.
Handling fee.
Handling fee.
$25. It's like $25.
Well, I think it's a percent of the dollars,
but
isn't
it's
it?
capped.
It's capped.
That's true.
And it only works when you do it electronically. You only get them allowance when you do it electronically.
Broward County gets back $125,000
Wow.
that they use on technology.
Yeah, and the $25 every month. It's every month.
Yeah, multiply that times. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you might be able to, and I don't know whether I should have them look into it even more, and I don't know how much Joe has, but I got some information back from Scott that he checked with Broward County, and they said they get $125,000 last year.
If we got 100 restaurants, that'd be $30,000.
So it's not a.
No, I'm just saying, if you got 1,000, no, a year. If you got 1,000, we'd get $300,000.
Are you saying it's capped at $25? I mean, I don't know any.
No.
I don't know much
The
about
amount of
this.
allowance you get for is like $25, maybe it's $30. I mean, it's a very small. I think it's $25. It's only.
It's not a percentage of the sales.
It's a percentage, but it's capped. So if you only have $10 worth of sales, then it's $1. But it's capped at $25. How much the monthly allowance is? So if you owe $10,000, you only have to remit $9,975. Right. And it's only when you file. They changed the law a couple of years ago that it's only when you file electronically your sales tax form.
Well, I didn't want to ask staff to look into this further unless there was some other interest in it, because we would have to go to our partners, and maybe Education Foundation could reach out to some.
It can add up. I mean, $25 per month, it's $300 for the company.
Times how many restaurants or businesses in our community.
Yeah.
So you would say maybe we'll look into it further? And I know that Scott and Joe did some look into it, and you thought maybe Mitzi or...
I was not even aware of this program, so thank you.
I wasn't aware of it either until I read it in that FAFSA thing that they says it FAFSA.
What I would suggest is even possibly going in front of the FICPA in a monthly meeting and giving a little spiel to the CPAs. Hey, did you guys know this? I mean, now that I know this, I'll say to some of my clients, hey, are you willing to give that $25? Because nobody cares about $25. Do you mind giving that $25 to the schools? And they'll say, I bet you most of them will probably say, yeah.
Yep.
I just don't know how to do it. So I have to figure out how to do it. Well, I mean I
think having CPAs, and it might be that's a good idea, and maybe if we do it, we can ask Broward County what they did with it. We can probably find out from Department of Revenue how many counties do it. But if it's out there, I don't know how long it's been out there, but it can't be that long.
I reasonably expect that most people don't even know they get a collection allowance on their sales tax. I think only the people filling out the sales tax form would actually know that there's a collection allowance. So
can we look into it further?
Yeah, I think it's worth looking into further.
Okay.
I'd be curious if someone could show me how to do it.
Well, that would be step one, is to understand what the mechanism is, and then to promote the mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea.
I'm bringing you more money.
Yeah.
You were going to show us how to do it.
No,
we're going to have a website dedicated or a landing page for Shirley, the Brown plan.
But there's got to be a way, because I can imagine you'd have to put the name of the district, the address. I mean, I don't know where on the screen you do that.
Well, I would think they know what county it is.
Well, no, it depends, right? Or is it only,
well, don't you know people up in DOR?
Not like you do. I'm a freshman school board member. Today's my 1-year anniversary.
Department of Revenue, you work with them all the time.
I fight them. You don't understand. My job is adversarial.
It's a few calls to the Department of Revenue, maybe Broward County and a couple others. And I didn't want to direct our staff to do that without your approval.
I will have somebody at my firm call up to DOR to see how we can do it, and I'll find one of my clients to do as a test subject and see how it works.
And then,
is that fair, Mrs. Brown?
In conjunction with that,
is that fair?
Do you have a contact at Broward that you can get more information on it without expending?
I will be with the superintendents this evening, and I'm sure Mr. Runcie will be in attendance.
There you go.
Are you coming for lunch tomorrow? You want me to save your seat?
I'll be there.
Okay, so then final item outside of members' comments is the policy procedures for approving of third-party organizations to speak and present to students, which was brought up by me, and I know we've talked about it, so do we have an update or discussion?
I asked Laura to do a little research on it,
Great.
and the answer will depend based on the topic, because we've kind of locked down policy in specific areas, and in other areas we've delegated to principals the authority, but Laura can cite chapter and verse, and you can give us some direction as to where we go from here.
Not exactly chapter and verse. Not exactly. Susie DeBose is on her way over.
Sorry, because we did change it.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And what is in policy is Safe and Orderly Schools Committee.
Before we go there, did Joe have anything he wanted to add to our conversation on the
we'll give Sue
on the technology tax?
The only thing I would add is
Speak into the microphone.
Come on.
Because I know you were talking with the technology department down in Broward, weren't you, or someone?
Yes, Ms. Brown. We did begin to look into this after receiving the information you provided about it. One of the initial questions we had, does this supplant any funding resources that we already have? And it does not. It is in addition to those that are there.
I would think the legislators aren't even clued in on how much we get.
No.
They don't tell them.
So I'm scheduled to meet later this week with my staff to get a full debrief on what they found. I know that staff has talked to members of Broward County already and to individuals up in Tallahassee about this. It is not something that districts as a whole across the state are taking advantage of. Broward has kind of been the pioneer with it, but there are a few others that are.
Well, yeah, there are some counties that have no businesses at all to speak of, except for prisons. They don't pay tax.
It is completely dependent on the businesses checking a box.
Yeah. And I just got a text from my staff because they're watching because they like to make fun of me. It's $30 a month, not $25, and so they wanted to make sure that you knew that I was wrong. So that the maximum allowance is $30 a month because they actually do it. I do not.
All right, so we'll work with Todd be the front man, and you work with whoever. Because
I have good staff.
I don't want to take the lead on this.
So if I worked for you, I could sit around and watch school board meetings while I was supposed to be doing my accounting work?
They want to make sure I'm not going to be there.
That's funny. Wow, at least they gave us accurate information on time to date. I love that. So
thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Do you want to stay and answer the next questions also? No. So thanks.
Then moving over, and thank you, Susie, for being available on the fly since we jumped the gun about an hour. So I appreciate that.
And I think what we would love is your specific question about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just give scenario based. I will use the Pineview. I think that's the best one to use is the Pineview sensitivity panel. And I had spoken to many parents, but also before and afterwards, and just for the anyone watching, is that was postponed. And there are other elements that have come to bear, and I wanted to know what our policy is. We deal with a number. This is not specific because I think it would range on content. To your point before, but we work with a number of third-party organizations. The district does, and they come in. And we want supplemental opportunities to have our resources and partners to come in and speak to our students. However, we run into some fine areas that I think we ought to have some kind of boundaries and policies. So to ultimately for the staff's and the family's protection. So I have not been able to really find that. I don't know what our guiding principles are. I think it's more challenging when you get into the gray areas of certain controversial topics, and the sensitivity panel certainly isn't when it relates to religion, when it relates to sex, when it relates to, I'm trying to think what else, politics or anything like that. So, but as a guiding force, what do we start with? What is that process? And my biggest question was, running the gamut of third-party organizations coming in front of students. Obviously, they have the background security checks that they have to comply with, I would assume. And second would be, if they're approved for X, are they automatically approved all the time, or are they? This would really come to bear more on the sensitive topics. Are they approved to come and speak at any time, or are there parameters on when they're able to and when they're not to?
Okay.
Is that fair?
So that's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But let's start with the sensitive topics, because that's definitely Susie's area, and there is policy, and we can send that.
I've seen, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think the very last question is probably where I wasn't able to get clarity on.
Can they come anytime?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So Susie, why don't you just go through what your committee does and.
Okay. So you know from the curriculum policy that sex ed and HIV and STD are taught by us,
yes,
or DOH only.
Yes.
Okay, so then we move to the other policy, community speakers, that says, and that's 4.31.
Thank you.
Prior approval for guest speakers for substance abuse and violence prevention issues will be obtained from the district's Safe and Drug-Free Schools Advisory Committee. And that is the committee that I chair.
Okay.
We meet every month, second Monday of every month, from 1:30 to 3, and presenters and programs are tabled. we're happy to share the questionnaire with you. What we look for, does it endorse products? Is there a fee? I mean, what is the content? And I think, very good question. If I approve, say, Alcoholics Anonymous, well, let's use one that might have other topics.
Also youth. I'll just use that one.
Okay. Also,
No, I'm not picking on them. I'm just using that one because I know it's come up a lot. And
it's A, so.
And it's an A.
yeah, it's right there in the front. So also youth is approved to present topic content on cyberbullying, violence prevention, and microaggression. They've shared with us their program outlines and their pieces, and that is what they are permitted to present. If they develop another program, and I know that Coastal Behavioral does this a lot, they'll add programs. They now added a wellness program or this or that. Then they come back to us and get permission for those programs and pieces. That is our expectation.
Okay, perfect.
We share that.
That's great. That I don't know if that, what is that?
We're going to get you copies. We didn't have
And I don't
copies
need them
made.
updated all the time. I think it would be helpful for us because, and this is, I'll go back to the Pine View sensitivity panel because I think that one's challenging. And if I have a student afterwards wanting to ask, what can we do if they, because I think I'll say this very clearly. I know that the intention was well intentioned, but execution matters, and we have to give guidance in those aspects, I believe. And I think it starts in the framework of a policy, and making sure people follow it is, and then if the policy doesn't work, then it comes back to us and we fix it. So that's where the genesis kind of came. But in that aspect, and we don't have to use that specific one, but they're already pre-approved, I'm assuming, because all of those organizations, I believe, were ones that work with the district in some capacity. Do they have to, and I have to, if you want to use a broad circumstance, we can, but so my understanding is they have, here are the parameters you can speak to the district to on any X topics. You gave 3 for an organization. If they want to expand upon that, they would come back to that committee.
To the committee.
Okay.
And let them look at that.
Let's be more specific. Only if it fits under the broad umbrella of that committee's authority. They could speak under topics not under the purview of that committee, but then they would have to go through the principal. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that all topics are vetted by this committee. This committee only vets, say it again,
substance abuse and violence prevention issues.
Okay.
So if it falls outside of that purview, and so their pre-approval at the district level for those 3 items came from that committee and the authority given to that committee. If they had a 4th topic they wanted to present, if it fell under that umbrella, they would go back to the committee. If it was outside of that, they would go to the principal directly.
Okay.
And that's in this 4.31 policy as well, what the steps are, what the process is. If, my dad's a law enforcement officer and he wants to come in and speak about character ed or whatever, that would fall under 4.31, and there's a process and with the curriculum. Has the administration looked at the content? Is it okay? Are parents notified so they can opt out?
No, I'm familiar. I've read that policy very closely. Yeah.
So I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble, but I do that all the time. So I'm Catholic, and so Bishop Dwayne is the leader of our flock in this local area. I was always under the impression that Bishop Dwayne, I would not probably support Bishop Dwayne going to a public school because of separation of church and state. So I'm a little shocked when other people from other religions are allowed to come in. Is my thought process correct? I mean, can you conceive of Bishop Dwayne coming into a public school?
Absolutely.
They're doing.
Really?
We would not exclude him based on any criteria. We would judge the presentation. And so if he had a anti-bullying message or an anti-drug abuse
No. He was going to come and talk about Catholicism.
No.
So if somebody's coming in from the Muslim American League and they were going to talk about Muslims, would that answer also be no?
Correct. You cannot proselytize, but they could come and give a presentation about substance abuse.
Substance abuse, but if they were going to talk about Muslims,
many of our congregations have active volunteers. They do a number of clothing drives, and but they don't witness to our students.
No, but if the person was coming there to come there on behalf of a particular religion, not about clothing drive or something else.
About being bullied for being a Jew or a Muslim. And talk about how they are affected, because I maybe not so much in our schools, but I know that in some areas if you're a Jew, you may be discriminated against, even by Jewish. You may be a person with a Jewish faith. You may be discriminated against, even by a teacher. And so I would think that if they were wanting to come in under the bullying umbrella.
But we agree that would be a hypersensitive issue, that bringing in somebody
but they're not going to come and talk about how good the religion is.
But we agree that if you bring in Bishop Dwayne, who obviously I like, I'm picking on somebody who I like, we agree that would be a hypersensitive issue, and that bringing in somebody of Bishop Dwayne's stature to come in and talk about Catholicism, even if it's under the guise of bullying of Catholicism, that would be a hypersensitive. We would try to find somebody else to talk about that besides.
Well, let's talk about him in regards to, let's talk about a science class, and if we're having a creationism evolution. I mean, that might be.
That's a good, that's actually a great example. And where do we give for our staff members?
So
once we move to
quote that
4.31.
Now we're into 4.10. So let me just read it to you. A course description shall be presented to the school board for school board approval before any course or unit of study on the Bible or comparative study of religion as provided in Florida statutes is initiated in any school. The description shall detail the purpose of the course, the material, the grade, location, length, etc. No teacher shall present or permit to be presented any material which ridicules. So, principals do have the ability to say to a teacher, if a teacher is requesting to have speakers come before their children, if it relates to the curriculum. So there is some principal discretion on that. But because this just came up last night, I knew from being a principal that there is a form that we signed for guest speaker approval. However, I'm also noticing it was never approved by Sally Frank. So it's not gone through the forms committee. However, it's something we will rectify, so I'm glad you brought this up. But it will require, I think, very similar things on here, that the teacher needs to say the presenter has a learning objective for the presentation that's curriculum-based. There's planned content, how student learning will be assessed, and then there's a guest speaker signature that we've always required in the past that says, I understand my presentation must remain on topic, and I have discussed with the teacher and the school and district policies regarding the content for the level of the students in the class.
So I still didn't get my question answered. Shirley kind of changed the question, but my question was, Bishop Dwayne comes, he wants to be on a panel, and he's coming there as the bishop, and he's not going to come talk about bullying. He's coming there to talk about Catholicism. Maybe I shouldn't use Bishop Dwayne. If there's an imam or a rabbi, and they want to bring somebody of specifically, somebody's there specifically because they're Jewish, or specifically because they're Muslim, or specifically because they're Catholic or Christian or Protestant, is that allowed? And it's not a curriculum, it's not in a class, it's a panel.
No, if it's not curriculum related, it's not allowed.
Thank you. That answers my question.
But if it's bullying related,
I think that's, and I had no choice but to use the sensitivity puzzle as a perfect example, because again, as I believe it was well intentioned, but it got into some very dicey discussions, especially religion being probably the easiest and most challenging to tackle. But that line is very specific, and I don't know that we have a committee that oversees that specifically, because it's not it's illegal. But that when you do it under that guise, having to then realign, and trust me, I've read through these policies, so I just didn't have the numbers off top. But fourth, the course description and the design, if you use bullying, sure, we can have a panel on bullying, but then you add in a religious component to it on school grounds, I think that you run into some conflicting issues. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. You should not be telling the unique experience of any denomination or religion. And so you should be staying in broad topics unless it is contained in a specific curriculum in which there's an approval process for a study of religion.
So, but I'm sorry. And so, but when we go to the approval, so, and I support, and I've said this a million times, but I support principal autonomy. So, I mean, and I actually really like that check and balance there, that there's a signature. There's very clearly illustrates there was a discussion with outside speaker. This is your lane. This is where you're going to stay. You understand that. You're signing off on that. I love that. That's great. I think that protects us too, also from an exposure and liability standpoint. But then we get into what would use the sensitivity panel process as an example. If they're not there to preach about their religion, there's just a representative of that religion to speak on bullying, I think is maybe, for example. So they're giving their own experiences to say, or I believe it was to myth bust, which runs, it's a little tough. So how, moving forward, if we use that example, is there a process that should have been followed, that should be followed, that can be followed, or cannot be followed, and we need to steer away from the religion component?
I think that if you're going to be doing bullying, there are ways to address bullying without bringing in a bishop or an imam. I would hope that we are addressing bullying now without bringing in somebody of the religious faith. There's got to be a way to talk about bullying without bringing in religion. I mean, can you successfully talk about bullying without bringing in religion, Mr. Brooks?
Happens every day.
It happens. It does. Okay.
And I guess maybe discrimination might have been a better word, because we do have a policy on discrimination, do we not?
Yeah.
And does that policy include religious discrimination?
Yes, it does.
So I agree that it's a slippery slope. Mm-hmm. We have to be very careful, but I don't want to totally exclude any discussion on religious discrimination if it is happening in the schools and they want to have a discussion on it. I think it's a very, very touchy subject, but I do believe that religious discrimination can be a problem, especially in the climate that we find ourselves in today. Whether or not we are big enough to discuss that at a school, and I don't know that every school would even be able to. Pineview, I think, might be an exception. But again, if in fact somebody is coming in to discuss religious discrimination, that they keep their comments to the discrimination or the bullying and not the religion, because we don't want them to come in and proselytize. I think we're all in agreement on that, or are we?
But if we have a school that has a culture of discrimination against people of the Jewish faith, then we got big problems that probably can't be solved by a panel. If we have a school that's just widespread discrimination of people,
racial,
racial,
gender,
any of those discrimination.
Yeah.
If we have a culture that it's not what we're going to address that one student, that we have, it's so pervasive that we need to make it school wide, then I think that we as a board need to be involved in that and fix that issue. I hope that we do not have any schools right now that have a culture of discrimination against any of the protective classes in our policy. Mm-hmm. Are you aware of any, Dr. Kingsley?
No, not a culture, but there have been isolated cases.
And you deal with that.
Swastikas.
On a cookie.
Right.
And you deal with those.
On a school building.
Yes. So it's not, I don't think there's a culture of discrimination in Sarasota, but are there isolated cases that principals and staff and children and families that go there are concerned about?
Yeah, and when we have people who get in fights, and we deal with the issue. But if we're having a fight club at a school that we feel like we need to, address it school wide, then that's a whole nother issue.
But if I may interject, because I don't know that all of I think we all quite frankly, I think we're all on the same page. It's just how to execute it the right way, and what does policy dictate right now? Does it need to be changed? My biggest thing would be if there were to, in just taking out of policy context, but just execution, if there's any kind of element like that, principals would always know that this is pretty black and white over here. This is a little gray. Let's go to our executive directors or superintendent. How do we execute that? Is it on school time and school property? So of course, but it's school during the school day, because when we talk about really, if the genesis and the focus is for any of the any discrimination or any safety security issues or it's always communication. We don't want to like dodge and dip on anything that may be concerning to people just because it was a one-off circumstance. But we run into some challenges when it's during the school day, and then in fact has to align to curriculum.
Absolutely.
Okay, and therefore maybe it doesn't mean you have to go through this whole, and that distinction I think is very important for the principals to understand, is that I want teachers to be able to have supplemental third-party organizations come in. It sounds like we have a great process right now, but there are going to be elements when it's through, and that's the clear part. If it's during school time, it has to align with school curriculum, and if it's outside that, we can find other ways of tackling on to the discussion you said about how can we change and help the culture. I think that's a bigger discussion and doesn't really come into the curriculum component, and I think that draws some very clear distinctions. Yes? Okay.
While we're talking on curriculum, I think we can talk, outside people are supposed to come in and they're supposed to talk on curriculum. I have heard, and there's scattered stories. You've got this, and I've heard it on the left and the right, where teachers bring in their own philosophy on government, on politics. Politics doesn't belong in our school unless you're somehow talking. But, they talk about the economy. We can even, I think we have to be very, very careful, and I think we need to make sure that our teachers are careful, that this is the curriculum. I've heard there's a teacher at one of our high schools that doesn't want to teach from the book, but that he brings in his own stuff to meet the, but I'm like, if in fact you've got a teacher that's giving it skewed left or right, are we really getting down to the core standards that we need to teach? Because I know that can be a problem. I know it definitely can be a problem in colleges where you've got a professor out there telling people they should do this. But I know that my sister had a teacher that actually told her that the way to solve the race problems is to intermarry. And God, she was so, but she thought, this is what she was going to do. She was going to solve the race problem by marrying, and I'm like, what? But, so you have to be careful. I think teachers, if they veer off one way or another, I think we need to know about it, and I think our principals have to let them know that, no, it isn't just free reign in a classroom. You can't go one way off to the left or the right.
That is absolutely correct, but I want to draw a major distinction between the curriculum and use of a textbook. The textbook is a tool. The curriculum is the mandated curriculum for that classroom, and so it is not American government with Miss Brown. It is American government as prescribed by the state of Florida. There are a number of ways to achieve that objectives, and some of our instructors are very well skilled at bringing in outside resources. I would never propose to script any course and to lock down an instructor so that they cannot provide different insights and viewpoints. But yes, they are to be a non-biased guide on your journey through any curricular study.
But if we have to approve the textbooks, and there is a way for the public to come in and challenge the content of that textbook, what recourse does the public have if, in fact, there's a teacher out there that's brought in another textbook or done something else.
I would
to
tell you
challenge
that
curriculum.
the scrutiny of textbooks is, to me, a little misguided. I would spend more time scrutinizing curriculum because it is the driving force within a classroom, is that a textbook is a delivery mechanism, and you may spend great time scrutinizing a textbook and it not be utilized on a particular topic. It's never, the lesson plan isn't let's start at chapter 1 and go to chapter 20. It is using it as a tool to achieve the curriculum. And so where I believe public scrutiny should best fall is on the curriculum. But specific to your question, is there is not a mechanism to scrutinize each and every instructional